Hello, everybody. Welcome to Buyer Behavior. I am excited to have you in this class. This is actually one of my favorite classes. It is what I actually did in industry for a very long time. If you've looked at my bio at all, then you can kind of see some of what I've done. But most of what I've done was research in the buyer behavior end of things. So this is really something that is near and dear to my heart. I can't wait to meet all of you online via Zoom later this semester. But in the short term, let's get started with buyer behavior and kind of just talk through a few of the concepts. This is a short lecture, only 16 slides to get us started, but we will learn more and more together as we go along. So what is consumer behavior? You'll hear it referred to as consumer behavior more than you will hear it referred to as buyer behavior. That's the name of our course here at NSU, but usually you will see consumer behavior as a course somewhere else. So don't be confused by that. They are the same thing. We are really studying individuals, why they buy. That's a really important thing. How they use them, how they secure of items. In my doctoral dissertation, I actually studied millennials and why, and how they dispose of portable electronic devices, things like e-readers and gaming consoles and iPads and tablets and phones and things like that. So it really is something that I have done for quite a long time. And I've done this for organizations as well. So why are we buying it? And understanding that why helps us figure out how we can innovate for them for future product consumption, how we can market to them, what sort of messaging that we need to get them to buy from the first time, and then repeat purchases as well. Those are all very, very important. And that'll be the focus of your project this semester as well. So how do we apply it? Well, in my particular circumstance, I used it to inform marketing strategy. It was then used, of course, by other groups, advertising groups, et cetera, to inform social media marketing, those strategies and things like that. But this is really what I used it for, was the marketing strategy. I also used it to help the ideation teams, innovation teams, and things like that create new products. So I used it for a couple of different pathways. And I'm happy to kind of discuss those things further. I'm also happy to even discuss without too much detail how I didn't come up with the name Snackle, but how the research that I did informed the Snackle campaign that QuikTrip now has. I did a field study that was called The Thin Red Line Between Snack and a Meal. And we talked about the price elasticity. At what point would people consider at what price point would people consider something a meal versus a snack? Because psychologically, people will consume more snacks than they will meals because they feel like that's a healthier alternative. So interesting stuff. But that's some of the applications of consumer behavior. What are some of the other, deeper, this is kind of more of a deeper dive of those individual concepts, of course. Social marketing, we do a lot of this in the digital media class that I teach. We do a social marketing strategy, and that persona development that you're doing here lends itself very nicely. It dovetails very nicely into that course. If you have not taken that course, I highly recommend it. I think that of the course I teach is that tends to get the highest feedback from students. They love that class. And so hopefully I'll see you in that course as well. If you are a marketing major, or if you're digital marketing, you'll have to have that class. But if you're a marketing major, I think that class goes into a lot of different directions that are applicable for marketers today. How do we think about marketing? It may have been a minute since you've had your marketing principles class. And so I have a fun way of sort of describing marketing that I will do in your Zoom meetings. I won't take up time here in the video, but it is a very interesting way of kind of figuring out how everything connects together, because it can be a little bit confusing. Oftentimes I'll ask beginning marketing students in the principles courses, how many of them feel like that advertising is marketing? And 99% of them will raise their hand and say that's what marketing, they thought marketing was. But it's really so much broader, right? It's that's one tiny piece of the entire marketing spectrum. And there are people who focus on that, but there are people who focus on all the pieces, the product, price, place, and promotion, and all of that entails. Of course, then there's the buyer end of things, there's the branding end of things, there's the the innovation, the positioning, all of those things have people who specialize in them. So don't get caught up that it's advertising, because that really is a pretty tiny little piece of that. Even though it is does have a major in most colleges, advertising does, it is a tiny piece. of marketing. If you can do, marketing as a whole, you might be tasked to do any of those individual pieces, including advertising. But if you're just focusing on advertising, you might not be asked to do a broader strategic marketing plan that makes you kind of really valuable in a lot of ways. And it kind of allows your alternatives, your options to be a little bit broader. Okay, so how do we go about this? Well, this marketing analysis, this data gathering and tracking, the research that we do, we won't get into that one really in this course. I do that in marketing research, to some extent in marketing analytics, but we won't get into that here. If you haven't had that class, you will do a lot of that there. This segmentation, right? The segmentation, targeting, and positioning, which you should remember from your principles class, that kind of funnel effect. We segment a larger market, then we figure out how we want to target them, and then how we want to position our product to fit that target and that target audience and that segmented group of people. So but we really need to understand why. Why do people choose something? And that is something that we will definitely talk about in our Zoom meeting as well. But why would I choose to purchase a product? I have a lot of alternatives. It is, in our day and age, it's very unrealistic to assume that there is not a suitable alternative that I could choose. Why do I give this company, this brand, this product, my share of wallet? Why am I choosing them? That is very important for us, not only to understand for ourselves, but it's important for us to understand for our competitors as well. How do we position ourselves against them if somebody is purchasing them instead of us? I mean, if I am BMW, I definitely want to know why people would choose a Mercedes over a BMW. They're similar luxury, what we call a high line vehicle, and I would want to know why someone would choose for example, a C-Class Mercedes over my 3 Series BMW. Those are comparable products in the marketplace with comparable consumers and target audiences. So why would they choose one over the other? And then I can mitigate against that. I'm going to create an advertising campaign to help sway those customers over to me. That makes a lot of sense. And then, of course, those particular brands have high loyalty, and so that's also kind of interesting to think about. Okay, so what are some of the components that really constitute consumer behavior? Well, there's these internal and external influences, right? These external influences that are we've got these advertising, we've got a lot of noise in our world around us right now. That definitely influences the kinds of purchase decisions that we make. But we've got internal, right? We've got internal sort of influence as well. If we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which we will in our Zoom meeting, obviously that's a pretty jam-packed session that we're doing. I keep referring to it. But if we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we think about this idea of I have my basic needs that I have to meet. But then we start going up towards the top and we start thinking about self-actualization, self-esteem. Products that have a luxury status to them are often fulfilling those kind of self-esteem needs. It's not as though a Timex is any better at keeping time, functionally keeping time, than something like a Rolex. But why would somebody choose to do one over the other? You've got a $20 option, you've got a $20,000 option. Why? What are the choices that happen there? And that self-concept plays a lot into that. So one of the things that we like to do is start you off with these ideas of self-concepts, and that first assignment really takes you through a little bit of that, because I think it's important to understand how you personally view these self-concepts with respect to a product or a service that you're passionate about, so that you can then apply them later on for your business that you'll be working on this semester. So that's the point of that particular assignment, is to kind of dig into that and figure out how that is going to apply, so that you can see it from a really biased perspective and then detach yourself later on. Okay, I'm going to skip over this because I've talked about this a little bit, but that information is there. Let's think about why and how we attempt to influence consumers. People who don't enjoy marketing, they will say that we manipulate consumers, but it's really an influence. 70% of people purchase something because they have been influenced in some way. Most of that is coming from word of mouth, friends and family. A lot of that friends and family is channeled through social media because they see those sort of things. That's why social media is so important to businesses, because that is their one way to harness word of mouth in a very effective and controlled way. But it can get a little bit dicey, right? If you have a a poor customer experience, then your, Yelp, Google, all of the different review sites will reflect that. And that can be difficult to manage. So it can be very powerful on both sides of the spectrum. So, organizations really have to be clear about how they're harnessing that, because, nothing says a product can be, done away with, like cancel culture. So people are more likely to be negative about a product or service than they are to be positive. So, that takes pretty strict controls to manage this. But how do we influence them? We want to take something up beyond a satisfaction of our basic needs, right? That Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Yes, of course, a burger from McDonald's will satisfy the need of hunger, but we want to create loyalty. We want to create somebody that's coming back over and over and over again. I call it a heavy user, frequent user. That's what keeps the lights on, right? These repeat customers are easier to keep than it is to get a new customer. So we have to always be cognizant of those customers and why we need to kind of hold them close to us and not take them for granted. So, I mean, you'll see a lot of this thing about these criticisms of marketing. And of course, is that ethical? Is marketing ethical? There are definitely brands that slide across that line and maybe veer into some unethical territory. I tend to think that brands who are using messages that are, political, sexual, medical, all of those, religious in nature, and they use celebrity endorsements for those, tend to be on the unethical side, just simply because if you're going to be an actor or an actress and tell people about the types of policies they should have from a medical standpoint, and they have no medical background or training, I personally tend to view those as really sliding around that ethical ice rink, if you will. I mean, I tend to raise an eyebrow at some of those. They get very, very close to the line, and some of them definitely scoot over it. And I know you all have seen some of those advertising. It's particularly prevalent at election time. And we see a lot of that. So just be mindful of that and how that advertising works and how people are being paid and what they're being promised, of course. Okay. So cross-cultural, the concept of culture, of course, this is these laws, these morals, these customs that will define a particular group of people. If we think about the differences between boundaries, what are my boundaries, my norms? These are all being derived from my cultural values. I have culture is a big deal in marketing, because if I've got a global product, I've got to figure out how to satisfy that for a multitude of different cultures. If I've got a geographically specific product, maybe not as much. So I've got to really think about the challenge, of course, is that products that are being sold online are often global in nature, just because of the availability to a world at large because of the e-commerce factor. So we have to kind of consider what that cultural value is. Now, that's not to say that we don't have culturally specific products. We certainly do. Absolutely. We see, there's culturally specific foods. And even further down, there's culturally specific food for specific religions, not just groups of people, So we think through all that and when we do our market research and how we want to position that product. And we've tried to figure out, is there a way that I can position it for the masses? We see kosher hot dogs, for example, being now marketed more toward the masses because a lot of people enjoy that flavor, and it's not just from a religious standpoint. So think about that when you are creating your plans and you're moving forward, how your product can be affected by different cultures and how they're going to receive that. Okay, so there's some three classifications that we have for culture: the other, the environment, and the self. Let's kind of jump into those really quickly. So what are these other values? This is how these are reflecting of society and how we look at relationships between individuals and groups, right? We've got these generational differences, right? We've got these masculine, feminine. We've got these diversity, types of issues. We've got certainly of topic now is, how we view people from a religious standpoint, how we view diversity from a race standpoint, how we, from an age standpoint, from a sexual standpoint, from all of these sort of things play into this other oriented values that we talk about. What about environment oriented values? This is our relationship that we have with our economic technical environment. Okay. How do we, how do we function within an environment that has, that is so heavily dependent on technology and our economy? We have seen a lot of that over the last couple of years with the economy, teetering in this sort of recession. Is it or isn't it sort of thing? And then of course, technology as well. The dependence on technology during COVID was never more apparent. That was our way to stay connected, because as individuals, we need connection points with others. And we, in that isolation, had such a damaging effect on mental health across the world. So we kind of look at those environment-oriented values in that way. What about these self-oriented values? These are the types of things that an individual members of a society, like, so we've broken it down here. These individuals, what are the, how do we find our gratification? How do we make purchases based on these material, non-material, like I was talking about, these self-esteem type things? So really it comes down to this gratification. We see this moving across, right? We call, and we have people term themselves for it, right? I'm a techie, I'm a foodie. I consider myself a very religious. People will say that. I'm an avid reader. And even across channels like TikTok, you'll see that they have isolated themselves into these sort of buckets that are self-oriented values. I'm a big proponent of book talk, but there are, because I love to read, but there's, all kinds. There's fashion talk. There's if you look at them all, you will see all of these things and how they sort of bucket together. I think that that's a really interesting way that people have created these self-oriented values in a social media spectrum to help unite with other people with similar self-oriented values. Okay, let's talk about nonverbal communication. We know what that is, right? These are the things that we do. This is our body language, right? These are the sort of arbitrary meanings that a culture assigns. When I was in my first job for a Japanese company, there were so many nonverbal communication, cultural references that I had to be aware of. And this can be, we see this a lot in culture, but we also think about these cues in a very different way. If someone raises an eyebrow, if you say something, what does that mean to you? When we're in class, we have a fun exercise where we do this, and I kind of ask you what I mean by just very specific nonverbal things that you might see out. I'm crossing my arms, I'm leaning back, I'm kind of slumped in my seat. When I was working for the Japanese company, we tend to say we're at a movie theater or a concert event or something like that, and we need to leave the aisle to go to the restroom or the concession stand or something like that. We do it, with our backside facing the individual. In that particular culture, they face forward to you. That's what's, if you've put your backside to them, they would consider that quite rude. So really interesting sort of things to get involved with. And if you are working for an international company at some point, you really will need to understand what their cultures are ahead of time, so that you make sure that you can try to have those guardrails and you're respectful of those when you come in. Nonverbal communication is quite key. Okay, what about the global youth culture? This is kind of interesting. What we have seen going forward is that Gen Z really does share a lot of common cultures that other generations have not shared globally with one another. And this is, of course, as you can guess, really due in part to their connectedness, their digital connectedness through social media, through gaming platforms, through, all of these different channels that they have the ability to, connect with one another on, that other generations did not have. Now, that's not to say that there's not a portion of younger millennials that do not also fall into this. They certainly do. But if you look at, what we kind of, millennials is a broad swath of people. It's quite large. When you think about 1981 to, roughly 2000, that's a very large group of people. You've got folks that are in their early 40s, and you've got folks that are still in their early 20s. They're very different life stage, and their connectedness is quite different, because the older of those millennials will have been digitally connected for their entire lives necessarily. There was a strong evolutionary period with technology for them. And then, of course, if you move into Gen X did not have the internet growing up. That was not something that we had until You know, the younger of us were in college, and of course the older of us were already out in the workplace and had to adapt to those technology and really you know, kind of come to understand that and how it applies. So it's quite interesting to see what we call digital natives versus people who have had their lifestyle adapted. So, but that has created a unification of global youth in terms of their culture and their ideas and how they perceive the world around them. Okay, so what about global demographics? You know, it's quite interesting. And demographics, when we think about these demographics and we think about this age, we think about gender, we think about income, we think about all those sort of facets that make up demographics. I mean, they're very widely diverse, right? If $1,000 here might be an annual income for someone, you know, in another part of the world. So it really varies quite dramatically. And you see businesses that are very respective of that approach when they try to go to other countries and try to adapt their product so that they can have a higher level of global distribution. So, and it affects certainly their consumption patterns. We in the Western world are heavily consumptive. You know, we purchase a lot. We have a lot of that purchase comes for our own self-gratification. But in other countries, that is really basically satisfying the needs that they have, basic needs. So very different, the role of demographics across the world. Okay, this is just some kind of questions that you can ask yourself to make sure you have a good understanding of it. Definitely reach out if you have any questions. I'm happy to help in any way, shape, or form that I can. And I look forward to getting to know you this semester. And I can't wait to meet you on Zoom later in the semester as well. So thank you so much, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.